Failing Our Way Forward podcast is live.
Officially live. We're going to talk about the number one thing that destroys marriages.
Well,
we're just gonna hit right on the.
It's number one according to Google. I'm not committing to agreeing to it.
You know, does he ever commit to agreeing with anything?
No, but I actually don't even know what Google says this is.
Well, Google says a lot.
You said we're going to talk about the number
one thing that destroys marriages.
That's what you said we're going to talk about.
So
do you want me to go ahead and tell you what I think that is without knowing what we're actually going to talk about?
Well, that's totally up to you. But if you're watching live right now and you know the number one thing that maybe you have dealt with in your marriage, or you think the number one thing that destroys marriages is the idea that you have, then comment below and let us know.
And we'll just sit here and wait. No. So do you want me to take a stab at this?
Go for it.
Or do you just want to just dive in?
No, you go ahead.
I would say the number one thing that kills marriages is selfishness.
Okay.
What?
Well, that is so true.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. It is so true.
You are so right.
Yes,
Quintin.
I know.
You're so right.
I know.
Because honestly, that's a big umbrella of all of these things. So if you can get more finite as
to...
Yeah.
Then selfishness is this is what the world teaches right now. The God of the almighty me.
It's true. It's true. Selfie. It's all about me.
That's right.
We can call it an ussy.
So what did Goggle say?
Google said it's contempt.
Contempt.
So when you have disrespect towards your partner...
Contempt is the number one killer for marriages.
Number one killer
what
for marriages.
What psychobabble BS is that?
I think it's true because I printed off exactly what it says. It says contempt, expressing a lack of respect for our partner, which is so true. So like when you're name calling, you're eye rolling, you're, kind of speaking under your breath. And they broke that into 3 different categories. So they say that like the number one thing that destroys marriages, and you say selfishness, which is true. This is a big umbrella of all these things.
Yes. Contempt,
and then they break it down to 3 categories.
Let me hear the categories.
Okay, so contempt, being disrespectful to your partner. Number 1, by criticism.
Okay. Keep going. Okay. I want to hear all 3, and then we can...
you want me to just tell you all 3 right now?
I do.
Okay, so get a pen and paper, write these down. Criticism.
They can search it up on their web browser.
Well, it kind of depends, I guess, where you're searching from, right?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Okay. That's why I clearly identified the goggle as this.
You're exactly right. So, so number 1 is criticism.
Okay.
Number 2 is defensiveness.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. And number 3 is stonewalling.
What? This is stupid. Those are the 3 biggest destructing...
I think so. Because if you dissect each and every one of them, I do agree.
Okay.
I do agree.
I don't agree.
Okay, so let's
go. This is perfect.
Yeah, let's start with criticism.
Okay.
Okay, so they define criticism as attacking a partner's character.
Okay.
So who you are, they're constantly kind of taking darts at that.
Sure. Why do people do that?
Well, you're going to say because they're selfish, but
I'm going to say that.
I think it's because they have things within themselves. Are you going to say because they have contempt? No. I think it's because they have things within themselves that maybe they feel, inferior on, and they figure if they talk about somebody else's character or try to tear their character down and criticize them, it makes them feel better about themselves.
What was the last word you just said?
Themselves. Selfishness.
Oh.
Again, the big umbrella, the number one thing. So yeah, you're right.
Oh, look, you are going to say you're right so many times.
You are right.
This is going to quickly become my
Your very favorite podcast.
Yes.
The number one thing that destroys marriages, friends, is selfishness.
Contentment. No, you said content.
But it's content.
Okay. So I say this to my kids, and we fail at this all the time. So I just want to be clear about this.
Because we're failing our way forward.
We are failing our way forward. We're still going, right? And so I'm not proclaiming that we are like this example, the shining star of of selflessness. But I will say this, okay? 100%. If you find 2 people who are committed to a selfless relationship, it will last forever. I guarantee that. Guarantee it. If my commitment to you is to outserve you, and your commitment to me is to outserve me, do you think that marriage will fail?
No, I don't. But I do think it's a decision each and every day to make that decision.
I agree.
It's very hard to wake up day in and day out and serve you. I'm not you.
What? Nah.
But I think it's just hard. It's like goes against the grain of how we feel, our emotions, our circumstances, you name it. If you're listening, you're probably thinking the same things. Like all the hardships of life, right? It's so much easier to lean into myself.
Right. So I would say
it's so true.
That,
you're so right, Quintin.
Gosh, I need a tally mark on this. Yes. So selfishness is the number one destructor of any relationship, specifically your marriage. And so if you live in a world where your focus is on servitude, so in my mind, and I would feel free to correct me on this, in my mind, servitude is the opposite of selfishness.
Absolutely.
Okay. So specific to my marriage,
yes,
serving you
yes,
is the opposite of serving me.
Yes.
And I could argue that they're one and the same, actually, because
right.
the two shall become one,
right.
according to the good book,
yep.
right?
Yep.
So I can make a biblical argument that not only when I'm serving you, I am actually serving myself. So now I'm being selfish again.
Okay.
But
full circle.
Right? I know, right? I can
go
pick
down
this
those
apart.
rabbit holes. So
I can.
What's interesting is you need a tally mark for the times that I say that you're right.
Yeah.
I need a tally mark for all the times you say I could make an argument for.
Yeah,
I could disagree.
I do like to argue. Okay, that's my jam. That's why
I could argue.
Well, because here's the thing. One of my biggest
I'm gonna Google that.
pet peeves with podcasts is they present information that's in it's like this absolute set in stone, rock solid. I know everything, and you guys are stupid.
Well,
and
you know what? We want answers.
Well,
people are seeking answers.
But it's your answer. Okay, so just because it's your answer doesn't mean it's my answer.
Just because Google's the answers doesn't make it your answer.
And so I'm only coming at this from a place of experience with some wisdom and a lot of failure, okay? And I can tell you that servitude and selflessness are the keys rooted in Christ. I don't want to take that away because I think that when you root things in Christ,
you have a foundation.
That's right. It's the tree. If you abide in me, things will grow, okay? And so it's the John approach, right? And so if we are in a committed relationship where we are trying to outserve each other, it's very hard to fail in that. It really is. Now, that's a hard thing to dial up, right? But I will tell you, and as time goes on, in this world that we live in, it's always been so. I mean, we are hardwired to be selfish. It's actually a fight or flight defense mechanism thing. Like, I need to take care of me, but what do they tell you on the airplane? Yep. When the oxygen mask drops down, who do you put it on first? You, because you can't help them if you don't help you, right? So
there's some truth to that.
That's right.
Yeah.
So selfishness or self-centeredness has roots of truth also, okay? Mm-hmm. But everything that I ever read in the book, on the good book, he's always talking about servitude. Jesus came and he talked, I came as the Son of Man to lay my life down as a service to others, right? A sacrifice for others. And so he calls us to model that example. My job as a husband is to sacrifice myself to my wife, to my family, as Christ did for the church, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. So the opposite of that, in my mind, and again, we can dissect this, is selfishness. What does the world primarily teach us today?
Self-love.
Self-love. That's right. And so if we are in love with ourselves, we are focused on what? Ourself. We are taking care of who?
Ourselves.
That's right. Our focus, our care, our love, our effort is all on?
Ourselves.
So who is it not on?
Others.
Specifically in a marriage?
Yeah.
Or spouse?
Yeah. If you're not happy, it's time to get out. If you're not, so again, you're right.
Yes! I love it. I love it.
You're
right. So what was the first one again? Sorry.
So the first one was criticism.
Criticism.
And I do believe that to be true. I think if you are selfless, you're not going to be criticizing because you're going to be trying to edify and
build up. That's right.
So I guess a lot of this is kind of under that same umbrella of being selfish. That contempt is being selfish and criticizing, because I truly believe that people criticize to make themselves feel better about themselves. And I don't know that it's intentional. I don't think people intentionally set out, maybe some do, but I don't think people intentionally set out in a marriage to criticize their partner. I think it happens over time. And it's like the slow fade that starts happening before they even realize it's happening. It is criticism. It's rooted. It keeps growing. It's how you feel inside. So you start to kind of spew out how you feel, and it becomes criticism. And I think people could define that as, hey, I'm just giving you constructive feedback, and it could be criticizing their character.
I would agree with that.
But this one says attacking.
So here's the hard part. There will be people who listen to this and disagree. And I like to think of things... there will always be exceptions to the rules, right? So to say that, there will be people who came into a marriage or a relationship just to criticize. That's probably true. But 99.9% of people didn't.
Yeah, I don't think people want to live in an unhappy relationship.
I think hurt people.
Yeah,
and
you
so
just don't know.
You seek that out. Sometimes subconsciously.
Yeah,
you're seeking out. That's right. And so what you bring into a marriage, the baggage that you bring in, so maybe you grew up in a house where criticism was routine, criticism was a normal part of life. And so for you, criticizing my spouse is just normal. You follow that?
Yeah, like, I'm going to help you. I'm going to tell you that
or maybe
this
you're just
isn't
a turd.
right.
Could just be that you're a turd. You don't even know that you're a turd, but you're a turd.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are exceptions to rules. And so, like, people always want to point out in the comments, like, the exceptions. We're not making podcasts about the finite examples. We're making podcasts about the general masses. So most relationships, almost all marriages, you didn't enter into that marriage to criticize the other person.
No.
Right? No. And so if you did, you're the exception, right?
Yeah.
But when we get there, sometimes we do slow fade we digress into these places. But I think a lot of that still centers from selfishness and hurt. Hurt people. Yeah. It goes back to, we talked about this with the boys. I can always tell when the older boy had a bad day at school because he's going to come home and he's going to be mean to the younger boy, right? Yeah. Control the things and people around you that you can. Well, that we do the same thing. We do that today to each other. Like, we've done a better job of recognizing it, and maybe sometimes a better job of shifting courses when we recognize it. But everybody does that, right? To some degree. So contempt to me has this malicious undertone to it. Now, I could be applying that myself.
But I think it does. But I think it's the slow fade of that. So relationships don't,
But you don't enter into a relationship with contempt.
No. But we're not talking about entering into a relationship. We're talking about things that destroy it. And so I think it starts to build. And so it goes back to you saying hurt people, which I completely agree with.
But how does contempt build?
I'm going to explain that to you. Hurt people. And I think a lot of times you become so hurt that you don't intentionally, you subconsciously start to hurt people because you start to feel like you're the only one. So I can't depend on somebody else because, this person, that person, and this person, all of my life, people have left me. All of my life, people have been, XYZ to me. And so the only person that can look out for me is me. And so it becomes this slow fade of, almost we say the opposite of how we're feeling. Like we want to be edified. We want to edify because we want that person to be there, but the fear is holding us back. So we're criticizing in place of what we want as an end result.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I just have a hard time accepting contempt is one of the number one reasons why marriages fail.
It's number one.
According to Goggle. And some brainiac behind a computer screen. So if I went out there...
I would say criticism is a very much part of being selfless.
So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to create a website with high SEO and put selfishness is the reason why... and then when someone Googles it, they're going to be, oh, it's selfishness. And they can have a podcast. And then they can divide their categories.
Very true.
Okay, what's number 2?
Okay, number 2 is defensiveness. Protecting from criticism by using excuses or shifting blame.
So they're clearly just tracking right off this. We're going for the other side of number 1. So you have the contentious partner, and then you have the defensive partner.
Well, that kind of happens in life, right?
Sure, so but defensiveness is typically a barrier of protection. Like I'm
kind of going back to what I just said. You've been hurt by all these people in your life. Again, maybe you grew up in a household where there was toxic, and I think all of us, whether you've labeled your childhood toxic or not, have hurt from their childhood, whether it was a great childhood. I mean, life's not always amazing, right?
What?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Right? And so, you're gonna walk away with 18 years living in a household. You're gonna have some hurt there. And hopefully it's been resolved, but it may be unresolved. And I think that unresolved hurt comes from, obviously things that you haven't resolved, but that defensiveness comes from a place of feeling like you don't have anybody. And so you have to defend yourself. You have to fight for your right. You have to fight for your voice to be heard. And so that defensiveness, I think, is part of I think it's a duality of maybe one that's louder and one that's defending, and neither one is right.
Okay. You ready for this?
Sure.
Okay. So defensiveness, I would argue, is rooted in what? Self-preservation.
Right.
So I put up these barriers. I put up these walls to protect myself.
Yep.
Who are we focused on?
Yeah, it's self.
Selfishness.
Yeah.
We got there again.
I'm just going to take a pen and put selfishness.
So even though maybe justified, defensiveness is still selfish.
It absolutely is, because it is self-preservation.
Correct.
Kind of what I was trying to explain earlier about, like, you have this hurt in your life and you feel like you can't depend on anybody else, so you build walls.
So if we're keeping score, I'm going 2-0 on selfishness.
All right, let's go. So
What's number 3?
I think number 3 you're going to feel the very same way. Stonewalling.
I don't even really know what stonewalling is. That's just like ignoring you?
Is withdrawing from communication by ignoring, zoning out, or acting busy.
That's what they would classify as one of the top reasons that divorces or marriages
contempt, and then those 3 things. So how you deal with the disrespect factor of one another. You criticize, you become defensive, or you stonewall. So I think they could be even say, like, hey, when you're arguing, you kind of fall into these categories. That's probably a better way to say it. So we took a newly married class when we first got married. I know we've talked about that before. It was so good because it talks about how you've taken baggage from your childhood and you take it into adulthood, into your marriage, and understand why you're fighting the way that you're fighting. Fighting can be healthy. Fighting
disagreeing can be healthy.
It can be very healthy, and being okay to disagree, but it needs to be in a healthy way. And so we have a tendency to bring things from our childhood and how we deal with conflict in our marriage. And I think these would be perfect examples of how people are dealing with conflict in their marriage that aren't equipped to know that, hey, I'm bringing toxic behavior, toxic baggage into that relationship.
Okay,
criticism,
so back me up
stonewalling.
Back me up and walk me through stonewalling again.
Stonewalling is when maybe you've hurt somebody's feelings and all of a sudden they're just, again, putting a boundary up of like ignoring you, becoming way too busy, like don't have time to deal with this, I'm just gonna busy myself, or it says zoning out.
Because I feel like
TV.
Oh, well,
back in the day.
See, yeah, I know where you're gonna go with that. I could see where that can lead to a destructive trait, but I would argue that part of stonewalling could be healthy in the sense that, when both of us are very much the same way. Like when we are in the heat of our emotion, like we're better off, both of us, just give us a minute. Withdrawing
from communication, I think, is the first part of this, but I think that is necessary sometimes. So we've talked about,
you just gotta chill out.
Like, hey, let's take a break on this. We'll come back. Or maybe it's not even a conversation that we need to have because really we're not going anywhere with it. We're going.
Yeah, because when you're fired up, you're running on high emotion. Yeah. Logic isn't working.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I think it's better to, what was the word? Stonewall and just like chill out. So I don't.
So
probably not what they're meaning.
It would not be withdrawing from communication. It would be the other part of the communication. So there is a part of a withdrawal. Stonewalling is not a positive thing. That is making someone feel like you're absent, you're ignoring.
So this go back to where you started to touch on. I interrupted you. I apologize, but this is what your dad did.
My mom did the same thing. So I can talk about both sides of the coin there. And Mom, if you're listening, I love you. I mean, it is what it is, and it's a way that we. It's a way that we deal with pain in our lives.
But your dad was this was really a strategy he employed.
Yeah. So, my dad
would
would
just
get
disappear.
upset.
He would sit in the front of the TV forever.
Yeah, for 2 weeks, and Dad wouldn't say a word to anybody.
That's stonewalling.
Yeah, it's stonewalling. So he'd come home from work, and he would put on a show, whether he wanted to watch it or not, and he would just pretend like the world around him didn't exist. And we just kind of fell into that. If Dad was doing that, we knew Dad was in his zone, negative zoning out, and we didn't need to bother him.
So do you think that's one of the top reasons why marriages fail? Stonewalling? Is that prevalent, you think?
I think it's really prevalent. I think women, I mean, I find myself doing it because my mom, I know my mom did too. She's very she can't sit still.
Yeah, but...
To this day, she can't sit still. And so if you're constantly busying yourself, then you don't have to worry about or think about. And I think sometimes goes back to self-preservation. So I'm not one to deal with this. I don't want to have this conversation. I don't want this conflict. Or I'm going to make him pay for it. So I'm going to remove myself from the situation and pretend like something else is more important. It's like creating that idol between you. So yeah, I do think that this happens a lot. I think a lot of times it's is it apathy? Like when you kind of like the worst thing in a marriage, worst thing in a relationship is when somebody withdraws from you and doesn't want anything to do with that particular situation. So I can't even give you a good example because there's nothing on the forefront of my mind. But maybe it's something that, you want a conversation that you want to take or have with your partner and they're just absolutely not interested. And it's just that kind of apathetic attitude of like, it's checked out. You're checked out. In fact, I had a friend recently tell me she's filing for divorce because her husband's checked out.
Well, I think we all check out. So this is where I'm struggling with this in my brain a little bit. I'm trying to put it to an extreme, like
stonewalling would be extreme.
That's what I'm saying. I'm trying to move that to an extreme in my head to see if that ranks up there for me. Because I think we all do that all the time.
Yeah, we all do. We all have to withdraw from communication,
yes.
Like we just talked about a minute
ago.
We
can have a big blow up in this house.
We just need
for whatever reason, and I'll go mow the grass, or I'll go work in the garage, and you'll go downstairs in the crowd. I mean, it's very clear. Like she's mad, he's mad, they're mad, whatever. Just let it go. Sometimes I think that you just have to let that simmer. You do. So I'm trying to take that, which I think is not unhealthy necessarily, to the extreme, which is
stonewalling.
Checked out, and I'm totally gone. And again, so I go back to well, if I am stonewalling, if I am checked out, if I am walled up, why am I doing those things? I'm doing those things.
Yeah, because you feel like you've got no hope. So I think an apathetic kind of outlook in life, you've given up.
Yeah, I almost feel like that's the least selfish one of them all, because it's almost complete defeat. So is defeat about you? I could make an argument that it is.
I do.
Is checking out about you? Yes. Certainly I can make that argument. But I almost feel like it's detachment more than it is selfishness. Meaning I just throw my hands up and I'm done.
But it's all selfish feelings. You only feel that way.
Or
so
failure, or I'm trying to think of myself when I've been in situations where I'm defeated. I'm just completely spent. I'm giving up. I'm broken. I quit. Is that about me? Yes, those emotions, those feelings are about me, but the situation sometimes dictates that as well. So meaning, I'm trying to relate this back to selfishness or not. It feels to me like that one's the least selfish, but I have to unpack it more.
I could see how you think that, but I don't think so.
Well,
because I think it goes back to, again, self-preservation. Don't want to deal.
Unless you're doing it with malicious intent. So I go back to your dad as an example. Sorry to use your family, but I think he would do it maliciously. Like he would.
It was a control factor.
He literally would stonewall. He would not talk to people intentionally.
Yeah,
not
just to prove a point.
Yes, or I'm gonna sit in this room and ignore that's stonewalling, I guess. I'm gonna intentionally do it. So I don't know. I've intentionally done it, but I haven't made it a relationship pattern. Is that the right word?
And I think that pattern happens because of hurt. So going back to, my dad was an amazing man. Hurt people. Mm-hmm. He probably had hurts that I didn't even know about.
Yeah, for sure he did.
And so how did he deal with that? Selfishly, he closed off. Yeah. And so kind of going back to, I'm now making a case for your selfishness.
What?
For the number one reason.
Oh, yeah!
And I am here making a case for it. But I do believe that stonewalling is not just withdrawing from communication, which I think that you need to do. It says by ignoring, zoning out, or acting busy. So, I do think that is one of the number one reasons that ranks maybe even higher than criticism. I can take criticism, but don't ignore me. Don't treat me like I'm
I
not
hate being
here.
ignored also. I agree with that.
Don't have an apathetic interest in me or attitude towards me, because that makes me feel like I'm not good enough. Again, all going back to me, how I feel. How we feel is really important.
Listen, so I would almost go back to say, like, when we are being selfish and when we live in our feels, that's the two biggest destructive patterns in a marriage.
It absolutely is. I think that's what keeps you grounded. So even like, our foundation is in Christ, and maybe you're listening to this and, you're like, well, I'm not a Christian. I still have a good marriage and a foundation. One thing I think that's kept us grounded in some of those vicious fights or disagreements is that I think we've experienced all of these. I think we've criticized each other. I think we've been defensive towards one another. We've stonewalled.
No, I'm not.
We've stonewalled one another, but they're not continual. Like, it's not a habitual, repetitive pattern.
Yeah.
But I think when we get there, we have a tendency, because of the foundation that we have in Christ, that we have a foundational basis that says, well, Lord, that's just how you feel. That's just how you feel. It's not what you want the true outcome of your marriage to be. And God has called me as a wife to be a servant, helper, to my spouse, and vice versa. And so we kind of go back to that. But it's not this habitual stonewalling, defensiveness, or criticism. But I do, and I'm going to interrupt you really quick, but okay. The girlfriend that said that to me, they're, from what I'm understanding, they're not, they don't have that same foundation. So they're going off all their feels, and it feels awful to be ignored by your husband.
Yeah,
it feels awful for your husband. And some hubbies,
it feels awful to be ignored by everybody.
Some hubbies are gamers, so all they want to do is come home and game all night. Well, you're not, but I know women that have husbands that are gamers, and they feel like they're doing it alone, and they're just apathetic towards their family or their household, and will sit in front of the TV and game.
Well, I would argue that dude didn't have a good dad.
That's right.
To set that straight.
You're right.
So,
but again, going back to...
And he's being selfish.
Yes. Well, we all have to learn these, and we all realize that we're bringing baggage into our marriages from the way we have seen arguments unfold in front of our eyes. Not that we've been perfect to our children at all, and we've had to ask for forgiveness many a times, but we all bring those that baggage into our marriage. And so, yeah, maybe that husband did have hurt in his life, but it doesn't validate why he's doing it, and it doesn't validate the reason the woman or the wife is criticizing the man for doing everything wrong. So they may have had hurt in their lives too, but hey, that's when we have that foundation to say, it's not about what I've experienced in the past. It's not about what I'm experiencing in all of my feels right now. It's what I want to do. It's how I'm going to overcome and have the marriage that I truly want.
Well, I feel the need, it's funny because I'm going to talk about feelings, to address, I am really a guy that's hard on feelings, and you'll see that throughout this podcast. So when we live in our feels, I think that's a terrible place to be. Now, having said that, I'm going to put a big asterisk by it. And I don't believe that you can live a life where you don't acknowledge your feelings.
No, I think feelings you're an emotional guy.
Feelings are very real.
I think it's very...
Oh, I'm very... Yes, yeah. I'm an emotional guy. I wear it on my sleeve. You're going to know how I'm feeling. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to verbalize.
Yeah. So
but
feelings are there
what I
for
mean
you,
when I say that. Controlled by your feelings. And I do think that we have to let the logic of our mind overrun the emotions of our heart. And so we have to understand, it goes back to love as a choice. There are days that we don't love each other, but I'm going to choose to love each other. There are days that we fail miserably at out-serving each other, but we have to choose the service mentality. And I think still I don't goggle. You are not correct. I don't believe that the number one reason that marriages fail are contempt. I believe that the number one reason marriages fail is
selfishness.
Which,
Quintin?
Lori?
I agree.
Yeah!
And for that to be successful, there's a lot of sprinkling an abundance amount of grace and forgiveness. And so, we all come from backgrounds that are different. We all come from backgrounds with hurt. We can either make life situations and experience make us better or bitter. And we have a choice in that. We have that choice. And that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes. Because going back to this number one thing that destroys marriages, and you say contempt or selfishness, I very, very quickly say, well, that's easy to fix. And then I'm very quickly reminded it's not easy.
That's right. So I was just thinking, it's funny that you just said this. So we talked about the problem. We didn't talk a lot about the solution.
Yeah.
So I think this deserves a follow-up podcast at some point where we will discuss the solution to the number one destruction of marriage and what the solution to that is. So in the future, very near, we will do a follow-up to this podcast with what we feel
would be the solutions
to what you're going to call contempt and I'm going to call
selfishness.
Selfishness.
But I think, again, going back to the number one thing that destroys marriages is selfishness.
And that's how you feel your way forward, right?
That's right.
All right, we'll be back to you
All right.
soon. Stay with us.